Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this month's session. And we're going to be talking about Samson and Delilah, one of my favorite stories from the Old Testament. And I was, as you know, probably most of you, that I've been very fascinated by stories and the way that story is used to present certain philosophical concepts. The main reason why story has been used around the world by all kinds of teachers, political teachers, cultural teachers, kings and queens, is because it's easier to examine difficult concepts, especially philosophical concepts, using a philosophical language. But if you use the language of story, then it's much easier to put these ideas across. So the Old Testament is full of these kinds of stories, which contain certain points or elements of wisdom. The methodology of storytelling in the Old Testament is rather precise. So there are certain symbols and certain things which one needs to know what they mean. And when you don't know what they mean, then the stories become rather confusing. So you might remember in many times in the Old Testament, the leader of the Israelites is ordered to slaughter the enemies, every man, woman, and child. Including slaves, even slaves, you're supposed to slaughter, which doesn't make very much sense in modern day language. But what this means is everything in your mind. So all the things that you want and wish for in your mind. And usually this is wanting power is the slaughter of men, wanting sex and marriage is the slaughter of women, children is your future, and slaves mean even those thoughts that you have which are under your control. So this is a rather involved form of metaphor or symbology that's used in the Old Testament that is confusing if one doesn't know what it is. Which I should say many Christians don't know what these symbols mean either. So I picked out this particular story of Samson Delilah. It's one of my favorites. And it's one of my favorites, and it talks about the nature of desire. Now, desire is the cornerstone pretty much of all religions. You might notice that in Christianity, very much monasticism, monastic religion was all about the subduing of desires which come from the devil and fixing the mind on what is holy, which comes from God. So the Christian monks would very often be very strong renunciates, would be walk around barefoot. Or one of the things that I noticed in Christian monasticism, they used to wear horsehair shirts. So a shirt made out of horsehair, which apparently was really cold and breezy in the winter and was really sweaty and uncomfortable in the summer. And the idea of the horsehair shirt was to make the person suffer. So I can let you know now that is in fact the principal reason why I'm a Buddhist monk and not a Christian monk, is our robes. We have our robes out of cotton, or mine is actually cotton and polyester mix because it doesn't crinkle so much. This overcoming of desire is something that, or the battle with desire, is something that's rather difficult in the modern era for many people to come to terms with. People want to keep their desire rather than overcome it. So much so that even in Buddhism, we have stories, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, where desire is not to be overcome, it is to be transformed. So it makes a nicer kind of idea of desire. I was at a Dharma talk by a Vajrayana practitioner, one Tibetan, but he's a layman. And he gave this very eloquent and long talk about how being afraid of desire is just another form of desire, another form of attachment. And what you should be able to do is use things and enjoy things so long as you're not deluded by them. So after the Dhamma talk, he and a number of the other people who were in attendance, they went down to a wine bar. So this was interesting. You go down, and while they're drinking wine and eating cheese, they are transforming their desire and overcoming their desire through using it wisely. Well, this is a mistake of the central tenet of basically all religions, which is to understand, overcome, and go beyond the nature of desire. And I'm going to explain how we can actually do that and what that means in real terms. There are many, many stories about the nature of desire. If you know The Journey to the West, the story of the monk and the horse and the pig spirit and the monkey spirit and the sand spirit, so the 5 travelers who left from China to go to India and find the scriptures. In that story, the nature of desire is represented by the pig spirit. And we notice that when the travelers first meet the pig spirit, he's extremely strong. And he's organized all the fields in the local area. But he's also kidnapped the local chieftain's maiden daughter, and he's keeping her locked up in a house as his wife. So the travelers are sent to try and rescue this maiden. So this is talking about the nature of desire. Of course, the pig spirit is a nature of desire. Desire is a very good organizer. If you want to organize your fields and your life and earn money and buy a house and things, you have to set forth desire. So this nature of desire as being the provider of people and society is definitely recognized. However, for the spiritual seeker, for the yogi, we have to learn to be able to put aside that desire. And so this is where we come to the story of Samson and Delilah. It's one of many, many stories in the Bible and in other places about how desire works and how the spiritual aspirant is supposed to understand it and go beyond it. So in the story, we have the king, effectively. I think he was a judge, but he's the leader of the Philistines, and his name is Samson. And he's extremely strong. His strength comes from his innocence. It doesn't say so in the story, but this is what he is supposed to symbolize, that the young, beautiful man with the long hair is someone who is innocent. For some reason, long hair always represents innocence in male and females. So he's extremely strong, and he has a number of adventures. And in one of them, the enemies, the Philistines, send a message to the Israelites, and they say that you have to send Samson over to our camp. We're going to kill him. So he tells his followers, he says, this is great. Tie me up and send me over to the enemy camp. So they did so. And once he's there, he breaks out of the bonds easily and then slaughters thousands of these people. And he slaughtered them with the jawbone of a donkey, which is interesting. In the Bible, it says it's the first thing that he could find to hand. Now, a donkey represents innocence or ignorance. So usually the donkey doesn't really know anything. So the flip side of innocence is ignorance. You're innocent because you don't know anything. And that's why he's using the jawbone of a donkey. How did he slaughter 1,000 people with just this? In the movie, which is where most people get their information, he stands on a very thin ledge and he fights them one by one. But that's actually not in the Bible story. In the Bible story, it simply says he defeats them with the jawbone of a donkey. So this motif of a strong, powerful warrior who is innocent but also ignorant, who doesn't yet understand, slaughtering the enemies. So this means that when this represents the thoughts that come into the mind, and when wholesome and unwholesome thoughts come into the mind, one is able to combat them and control them. So Samson, having proven himself and having slaughtered all of these people, the next part of the story, which is our part, comes to the story of Delilah and the story of his downfall. So I'm going to flip the screen to hopefully that you can all see the screen here. So this part of the story, after a number of adventures of Samson, it comes to the point where he had married a Philistine woman who had converted, of course, to Judaism. So having married this woman, Delilah, the Philistine lords came to her and offered her great wealth if she were to discover the secret of her husband's strength. If she would aid them in capturing him, they would give her a great reward. So immediately we see the nature or the promise of desire sets the entire story that comes ahead. So lured by the money, Delilah would torment her husband and try to lure his secret from him. Several times, Samson gave her made-up explanations, but Delilah was relentless. If you bind me with 7 moist ropes, then my strength will dissipate, Samson told her. If you bind me with new ropes that were never used, I will become weak like an ordinary man. So what happened was he told her, bind me with 7 moist ropes and my strength will dissipate. And of course, that night, what we see on the screen is a synopsis. That night, Delilah, while Samson was sleeping, called in her cousins and they bound him with the 7 moist ropes. And when he woke up, he broke the ropes off him easily and chased the Philistines away. So the next time he lied to her and he said, if you bind me with ropes that have never been used, then I will become weak like an ordinary man. And again, that night when he's sleeping, she calls in her cousins, the Philistines, and they bind him with the new ropes that have never been used. And when he wakes up, of course, he breaks the ropes off and flings them to the side. So she chided him further day after day. And eventually he said, if you place my hair on a weaving rod, I will become weak. And again, this happened. She tried this and it didn't work because he was able to, he still had his strength. So tearfully, Delilah, having tried 3 times now, said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? 3 times you have mocked me and have not told me wherein your strength is so great. Now you're probably wondering at this point, like, Hasn't Samson got the idea that maybe Delilah has got it in for him? That maybe she's tried to have him caught and captured 3 times? Well, that's, we just have to accept the story on the basis that it is. Remember, the story is not talking about a man and a woman. The story is talking about the nature of desire. So finally, she chided him and said, "You don't love me because you won't tell me the secret of your strength." So finally, Samson told him, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I am a Nazarite. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any man." So Delilah this time knew that Samson was telling the truth, and she hastened to summon the Philistine lords to her house. When Samson was sleeping, one of the men cut off his hair, and Delilah cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He jumped up, prepared to defend himself, but the divine strength he had possessed had departed from him, and the men who lay in wait easily overcame him. The heartless Philistines gouged out his eyes and led him to Gaza in chains. So, as I said, the hair represents innocence. I've never really quite worked out why this is, but this is actually true throughout many different spiritual traditions. And even in the Samana tradition, which is my own from India, the hair is a very important part of the symbology. So yogis in India will either grow their hair long and never cut it, or they will shave their hair off completely. I always wondered what hair has really got to do with religion. I mean, it seems to me a rather funny part of the human body to have to affect in a rather strange way of having a particular haircut or not haircut. But that's the way that it's always been. So in the story, after they capture him, by cutting off his hair, they cut off his innocence. So before, his power or his godliness came because he was innocent, but he was innocent because he was ignorant. He didn't know. He hadn't yet made that movement to God. So the stories, all the stories of desire point to this, that the power is God-given originally. You lose it and then you find it again later. So they did 3 things to him. In fact, it only lists 2 in this particular website, but they did 3 things to him. They chained him up, they gouged out his eyes, and they put him to work on the mill. Now, if you remember the way that you would mill corn, I presume, or wheat, would be you have enormous stone blocks, a large block inside a container block, and the horse would circle around grinding this enormous stone on the stone underneath it, and you feed the grain in, and then you get this very rough flour would come out. And normally this is performed by a horse or sometimes an oxen. But they put Samson to work grinding the corn or the wheat, gouged out his eyes, and they chained him. So this goes on for a number of years. Samson had lost his power. He's now blind and chained and forced to go to work. So some years later, or many years later, the Philistines gathered in a great temple. And interestingly, in fact, they were gathered on the roof of the temple, and they were watching. So they sent for the blind Samson to entertain them. Tormented and humiliated, he could not bear their jests. Turning to his guide, he said, "Lead me to the pillars so I may lean upon them and rest for a minute." And the boy obeyed and led him to the pillars of the temple. Samson, afire with rage and pain, prayed to God, "Give me this strength at once. Let me avenge myself upon these cruel Philistines. It does not matter if I die with them." And then suddenly, once again, he has the Spirit of God within him. He stretched out his hands and he tore down the pillars supporting the temple building. The walls and the roof came crashing down, destroying the entire building. All the Philistines and Samson were all killed in a great crash. So I can stop the sharing now. So interesting story. If you look on the internet, you may see some pictures of these Philistines all on the roof of the temple, which is interesting. So the meaning of this story is when you are young, when you're childlike, you are close to God, being a child. But being a child, you're also ignorant. You don't understand God, you don't understand yourself or men or human nature. And your godliness comes from innocence. But as you move into adulthood, you lose your innocence and you become enslaved to desire. Delilah in this story represents desire. You become enslaved to desire, and once desire takes root in your mind, there are three consequences, according to the Bible. The first consequence is desires will chain you to them. So your consciousness, your life, your psyche becomes caught up and chained to those desires and to manifesting those desires. The second thing it does is it puts out your eyes, which means that desire will blind you to the truth of things that are going on around you and the truth of God or holiness. And the third thing the desire will do is it will put you to work so that you will be forced to work and slave away in order to fulfill your desires. So this movement of Samson into this terrible position of being, of grinding the wheat, chained and blinded, this represents our adulthood and the natural path that human beings get taken down once our innocence is taken away from us. This theme, by the way, goes on through Buddhism, Christianity, Red Indian traditions, African traditions. You see these same motifs or story elements over and over again. I think of Adam and the apple, you know, is desire that originally brings Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. So eventually you have this scene of all these Philistines standing on the roof of the temple, jeering and mocking at Samson, which means that once you've been caught up and enslaved by desire and blinded by it and put to work by it, you are no longer a worthy character. You're no longer somebody who is close to God. And then they lead him out and he puts his arms on the pillar. Now, if you saw the Facebook post that Meredith put up, there was a picture of Samson pushing the pillars aside. And that's the iconic scene with Samson with his hands out. So hundreds of jeering, shouting, noisy, unpleasant, ungodly people standing up in the roof. I hope you can see what this symbol is trying to project to you. This is your brain, this is your mind and the thoughts. The roof of your temple is your head. And inside your head, you have hundreds and hundreds of these jeering voices that aren't out to help you. And when you're doing your meditation, this is what you come across. You start to experience directly for yourself this mind that has lost its innocence, lost its brightness, and now is full of these endless, in fact, petty, small, jeering, mocking thoughts that come to disturb you. So pushing aside the very foundation of the temple, the pillars that are holding up this roof, this is the moment that the religious aspirant steps forth out of the mind and returns to godliness. And as soon as he does that, the power returns to him, or her, of course, or them, we have to say these days. And then the temple falls down and everything dies, which is interesting that everything has to cease at that moment. So in terms of meditation, this is what we are doing in our practice, that desire is operant in life. And of course, you can't do anything without desire. If you try to be without desire, before very long, you'll find that you need to go to the bathroom. And then you're thinking, well, is that a desire or not? How do I overcome that desire? And so in a life sense, as a philosophy, being without desire doesn't make very much sense. You might notice, some of you may have come across Nichiren Buddhism, and they say this, that trying to be without desire is another desire. Therefore, you're always caught up in desire. And that's why Buddhists have all got it wrong. But Nichiren Buddhism transforms your desire into liberation. That's the line. So is the practicing of the path just another desire, or isn't it? Well, when we get down to the mechanism of it, no, it isn't. As a life philosophy, you can't be without desire. It's not possible. It's not really even desirable. However, one can refuse to be chained by desires. One can refuse to be enslaved by desire. And in this sense, you start to get the insight into desire itself and how to overcome it. And this is very much what many Vipassana practitioners are doing. You see a desire arise in the mind, and you see how it twists and pulls at you and draws you into unwholesome behaviors. I can give you an example. I was watching one of my favorite TV programs, which is Below Deck. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a really stupid reality show. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but I like boats, and it is kind of fun watching people. And they film the deck crew on a real super yacht as they do charters and have guests on board. And it's quite amusing. So in the episode I was just watching, there's a chief steward, and she has two girls working under her, and they have roughly the same amount of experience, but she appointed one of the girls to be the second steward and the other one to be the third stew. So the third stew was really pissy, is the word, about the second stew being appointed over her. She's no better than I am. I have just as much experience as she does. I want to be the second stew. I definitely should be the second stew. So she has this desire, or we could say feeling, come up, and you see her for the next 15 episodes. She's pulled around by this. This affects the entire working relationship between these two women who are never able to get along. The third stew is always being reluctant and recalcitrant. Whenever she's asked to do something, she does the opposite thing. And then the second stew gets rather inappropriate in her way, that she's trying to force herself on the other one. So this is what happens when your mind gets caught up in these small-minded desires and you're enslaved to them. This then becomes a source of suffering for you and everybody around it. I was noticed on this TV program, there are some people, there was another, she's a deck crew, and her philosophy was, hey, I might disagree with my boss, but whatever he wants to do, I'm just going to do it and try and do it well, so that we work well as a team. And their deck crew did work really well. So that was a much more mature kind of attitude of, I may have desires, but I will not be chained or enslaved by those desires. And I see this very much as a working renunciate, and I see this with lay people, because when we have a retreat, there's always like a layperson who says that I don't want to get up that early in the morning, I'm going to get up at a different time. There's always one who says, I need a different kind of food to other people, or I won't go without food in the afternoon, or I wanted this kind of bed, or I should have this kind of room. And you will have seen these kind of people, right? And you will have also seen it, I presume, in yourself from time to time, where you just get caught up in something. And if you have really seen the nature of desire, it can't take hold of you. It won't overpower your mind. Hey, sure, I want this, but I can't have it today, and that's that. Some years ago in the monastery, this was in England, somebody was due to come and offer food to the monks. And they think there was 4 monks and 2 novices and about 5 lay people. And the person never showed up. It got to 10:30 and we're like, where are they? They got to 11 o'clock and we're really starting to panic. And by 11:30, we're starting to sweat, because by 12 o'clock, if they're not there by then, we're going to go hungry for the day. So I was one of the 2 novices. So I said to the abbot, there is some food there. There's plenty of fruit, there's porridge and stuff. I'll just go and whip up some food. It won't be brilliant, but at least we won't go hungry. And the abbot said no. So we all sat there, and then it went past 12 o'clock and the people never showed up. So we don't get to eat that day. Now, for some of you, that's not so bad because you probably had breakfast and you're probably having dinner. But when you eat once a day, if you miss that meal, it's going to be 2 solid days before you eat again. Anyway, so the monks and the 2 novices, to a lesser degree, I was one of them, were willing and able to say, okay, that means we want our food. We're hungry, we deserve our food, but we're just not going to get it today, and we're not going to be pulled around by it. Unfortunately, the lay people in the monastery, they had a mutiny, and they all went off into the guest cottage and cooked up a bunch of food, and they had lunch. And that was without the abbot's permission. So it caused some tension in the monastery. It was a good lesson, though, that if you're in control of yourself, then desires aren't going to pull you around. And if you notice that you may see with really immature people, and I'm talking about adults too, are just not able to come to terms with not getting what they want sometimes, and throw tantrums or find excuses, or the main excuse for getting what you want is it's medical. Have you noticed that? When somebody wants something, the reason that they need that thing is because it's medical, not just because they want it. So the way that it actually works within Buddhism, desire is not something, not a philosophical, ephemeris kind of thing that it pervades through your life. Desire is something that comes up when you are in contact with an object. If you're not in contact with a particular object, then you're not desiring it. This is a technical point, but is crucial to Buddhism. So, for example, every time I see Meredith, I always think about cheesy Vegemite. I'm sorry, but your face, that's the immediate thought that comes into my mind. And so I want cheesy Vegemite. But do I want cheesy Vegemite when I'm not thinking about it? when I can't see it, smell it, or taste it. I haven't even thought about it since last time I saw Meredith. So if I put my mind onto it, then I start to get the desire arise from it. And only then. We cannot say that I have this lingering, pervasive desire for cheesy Vegemite that lingers through my life and causes suffering. Now, you may, if we go into psychology, you may actually form that argument, and there are valid ways in which you can think of that argument. But in Buddhism, that's not the case. In Buddhism, what you put your attention on, that's the object of your consciousness. And having put your attention on something, desire arises and pulls you in and starts to make you think about it, want it. So in dependent origination, an object is nama-rupa. So it's something that you put your attention onto. Cheesy Vegemite as an example, I was looking at these SIM cards, and I just realized I can get faster internet if I get a new SIM card. And so I've been researching that, and now I want it, right? Because I've looked at it, I've seen it, I put my consciousness onto it. And when I attach onto that thing as an object of consciousness, desire arises and starts to pull me in and pull me around. This is good news, because if I decide not to put my consciousness on that thing, very quickly, the desire for it will cease. So I simply don't have to think about it. So if I have to go without food for a day, then I don't put my attention onto it. If I attend to it, what happens is you get all these Philistines up in the temple cheering and jeering and shouting at me and controlling me. All these little thoughts, I'm so hungry, I should have food, and blah, 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 and it's not right in this day and age, and it's medical because I'm going to fall sick, and all the rest of it. Really, the truth is I want to eat something. If I don't put my attention onto it, that desire will cease. For me right now, or at least a couple of years, I've been looking strongly into boats. I'm quite into boats. I hated them, all my life, but just recently I've started to like boats. So I want one now. I've been designing my own boat. I've been deciding how I'm going to build it and what I'm going to build it out of. I haven't figured out where I'm going to get the money or a big workshop, and which is probably a good reason, because it's probably not a very good idea to go out to sea in something that I've built. So fortunately, I'll never be able to follow my desire for boats, but it doesn't stop me desiring it and thinking about it. But when I stop thinking about it, when I stop having that as an object to focus in my mind, that desire ceases. And this is really, really important in Buddhism, because for most people during your life, you have this feeling that these desires linger and last throughout your lifetime. And they don't. When you come to be a meditator and you're watching the mind here right now in this moment, what happens is the mind goes to one object, desire is sparked up, then your attention moves to another object, then desire on that is sparked up. If we are practicing well, then you learn to stop and watch that thought, that object of consciousness, stop, cease, and fade. And this, hopefully, is the insight that we've all been getting out of meditation, is that things will cease. I had this insight for the first time, I remember very clearly, when I'd started practicing, and I was a smoker at that time. And I was working away in the garage on my car, and the desire arose for a cigarette. And I caught it because I'd started meditating, some months previously. I caught that little tickle of desire as it came up in my mind. Ooh, I want a cigarette. And it wasn't very strong. I mean, it was barely a tickle in my consciousness. But every time I would get that little tickle, it would push me, oh, I want a cigarette. Oh, where are they? And then I reach for them, I look for them, or I start thinking for the cigarettes, and then I'd go and have one. And I remember very clearly that day when I saw that tickle come up. That right there, that's desire. It's just come up. And I sat there and watched it try and take hold of my consciousness, try and get hold of me, put out my eyes, put me to work, chain me. And I wouldn't allow myself to. And then what happened? That tickle just disappeared. And I felt myself completely free of the desire for a cigarette. And that was really like powerful experience for me, because that was the day I believe that I learned the value of renunciation. So desire comes up after you put your mind onto something. There is a feedback mechanism, that is, when something latches into your consciousness, it attracts attention, attracts your attention. When you put your attention onto it, then it becomes stronger. Then when you attach to it, it becomes stronger still and sparks the thinking. And the Buddha said, in fact, to the king of the gods, Sakka, he said, desire, king of the gods, is led by thinking, which is an interesting proposition. If you don't keep on thinking about it, the desire will cease. But there's a feedback mechanism. Your attention is caught by something, the desire arises. Because of the desire, you start thinking about it. Because of the thinking about it, the desire increases and perpetuates. If we know how to step out of the mind, out of this entire process of the mind, then this whole process comes to a halt. And what you are left with when the mind has stopped desiring anything, but is awake and is clear and is mindful and is bright, this is the unconditioned. This is what the Buddha was pointing to. When the mind isn't latching onto anything at all, any object of consciousness, the mind is simply with itself, is bright and it's clear, and it starts to become very, very happy. And because it's happy, it gets easier to concentrate upon it. And this is why the Nichiren criticism of Buddhism, that you are trying to be without desire, but that's another desire, is incorrect. In Buddhism, what's happening is your mind latches onto an object, then desire arises for that object. If you stop putting your attention onto the object, the desire will cease. That is cessation of desire on the object. This is not talking about the length of your life, like I'm going to be without desire for the length of my life. No, I'm going to desire to go to the bathroom. I'm going to desire to eat. I'm going to desire to get my visa. I wish I didn't, but I have to, unfortunately, get my visa. It starts in a couple of weeks. Next week I have to start that process. So as a lifelong philosophy, no, it doesn't work. But to a meditator who is accustomed to watching what's actually happening in the mind of one thing after another thing after another thing, we can see the end of desire. We can see what the mind is like when it has stopped moving, when it has stopped grasping onto anything. And what happens is, initially, you probably fall asleep because your mind is tired. But if you've done the meditation, you start to get these moments where the mind becomes very bright and very clear and very empty. And so this is the return to God that we find in the story of Samson and Delilah, the pushing aside of those pillars, and then suddenly God's strength is returned to us. By the way, some people may like the concept of God and some people may not. Obviously, for me personally, I'm quite happy with the concept of God, but I wouldn't normally use it in Buddhism, but we have to use it because we're talking about Samson Delilah, which is from the Old Testament. So this state of being without desire, we talk about in Buddhism. The main term that is used for this is viraka. Now, raka means to lust after. And so viraka means without lusting after. And this particular aspect of mind was highly praised by the Buddha. He said you should develop this state of mind of not lusting after anything. So I'm going to show you a sutta just as we finish off. And I'm going to share the screen. And this particular sutta is in the Anguttara Nikaya, which is one of the collection of the teachings of the Buddha. See if I can zoom it up a bit for you. So I'm hoping you can see this. But I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll copy the link for it and I can put it into the chat. So if anybody wants to, if anybody can't see it, then, or would like to see it later, you can do so. Unfortunately, for some reason, oh, there we go, in the chat. So I've put the link into the chat if you want, if you prefer to see it that way. So we won't go through the entire sutta here. In this teaching, I believe actually it was the Princess Chundi, who went with 500 chariots and maidens up to the Buddha and asked him a series of questions on behalf of her brother.
But so, what is on the screen was the Samson and the Delilah text.
Your screen may be frozen because oh, okay. Thank you for telling me. Okay, now you can see the sutta?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So this princess asks a whole series of questions to the Buddha. What kind of teacher should one have confidence in? What kind of teaching should one have confidence in? What kind of sangha should one have confidence in? And what kind of ethics should one have confidence in? And by the way, this is the definition of a Sotapanna or a stream enterer, is one who has confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and has the ethics or the morality of the Devas. So these four things together are the definition for what makes you a stream enterer. If you're not sure what a stream enterer is, you can ask in the questions, which will start in a couple of minutes. So the Buddha replies, if you have confidence in the Buddha, the awakened one, that is the best confidence. The Eightfold Path is the best of all conditioned things. And here in this sutta, it says, fading away is said to be the best of all things, whether conditioned or unconditioned. So conditioned or unconditioned is this word here. I hope you can see in the Pali, sankatawa, asankatawa. So the term conditioned and unconditioned in the Pali is this word sankata, or unconditioned is asankata. And sankata, san means to bring together, and kan is the same root as the verb of karma, or to do. So sankata is the action of bringing together. And so I've done some number of talks for you and other people about how this is actually a gestalt perception. So when you put your mind onto something, that's something that you're bringing together. So Cheesy Vegemite or Donald Trump or Samson Delilah, whatever it is, when you bring it together in the mind, that's a conditioned phenomenon, Sankata Dhamma. For some reason, Bhante Sujato uses fading away, which is I don't like his translation. The word is vitrago here in the sutta. As I said, raga means to lust after. Vitraga means not lusting after. So he translates this as fading away, but the actual definition is not lusting after. Those who have confidence in the teaching of the mind without desire, or the mind that's not lusting after anything, they have confidence in the best thing. And having confidence in the best thing, the result is the best thing. So I've left the link up for if you want to go through the whole sutta. But this is good enough to finish with, that time and time again, the Buddha is pointing to the mind that is without desire. Viraka is one of the words. He does in fact use a whole number of different words for this. This means the mind that is not caught up in any particular object. So I'm going to leave it there. That's the story of Samson Delilah. The three key points of the story. Strength comes from innocence when you're very young. As you get older, you lose your innocence, which is Samson losing his hair. You become blinded, you become enslaved, and you enchained, and you are put to work. And this is your life as an adult human being. For the person that can return to God, we bring down this entire process in the mind. We step out of it and step back into this strength, but now it comes from knowing. It comes from a point of wisdom and not from a point of innocence. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and leave it there for today. Hopefully that was clear enough.
Interesting.
Yeah. Does anyone want to have anything, any questions or any thoughts that you want to share? Please feel free to unmute yourself. Bhante, you have the desire for cheesy mind. I have the desire for potato chips. I can see the desire arising, but I'm not stopping it. That's the problem.
I have the same problem. Tubes of Pringles will do that for me, because I'll get through an entire tube of Pringles in one go. Yeah, it's a desire and catches you up and enslaves you to it. I should mention one thing that religions never point out, that one way to end a desire is to actually have that thing. So yeah, you can end the desire for potato chips by eating potato chips.
Exactly.
Unfortunately,
rather than sitting there and watching it and then trying to resist that desire and cause suffering. So you just satisfy that desire for a while and that's it. Stop.
And that's what we're doing. And it's quite fascinating when you actually really watch inside yourself these feelings. And the mind almost mocks you, you know, like you get this one thing and you'll be happy and you'll be happy forever. You just need to remove it. It's just so important. And then you eat it, and then the mind says, you shouldn't have done that. Full of calories, full of salt and sodium. Your mind hates you. Your subconscious doesn't like you. So
sometimes if it doesn't cause any harm, like those desire,
Desires always do.
it does too. I probably shouldn't confess to you, but I will. I ordered a big block of cheese off the internet a few days ago, 2 kilogram block of cheese.
Oh my God.
And it was very cheap. And the people that send it is this company called Kerry. And they keep saying that they tried to deliver it and I didn't pick up the phone. And I'm sitting here and I was furious, and I went stamping around to the local depot and said, where's my cheese? It was most embarrassing, but I wanted my damn cheese. So yeah, to the idea of living, this is what I didn't get. You know, when I heard about putting an end to desire like this, I didn't get it because I thought it meant that you have to live your life without any kind of desire arising. And that's not it. It's knowing this state of viraka, this state of desirelessness. Then everything becomes very clear. This is the path. This is what we're developing. By the way, the sutta I quoted to you, not the one on the screen, but the one where Buddha goes to the king of the gods. He says, desire is led by thinking. If you are not thinking about something, then desire for that will cease. And then he says to the king of the gods, but Saka, king of the gods, there are beings who, when they hear about putting an end to desire, their hearts do not respond. I thought that's one of that line has stayed in my mind for a long time. Because for most people, it's true, you talk about this putting an end to desire, they have no interest. They want to be holy or want to get enlightened, but when you put it in terms of being without desire, then they're not interested. It reminds me of this question somebody asked Stephen Levine on a meditation retreat. They were worried that they might get enlightened, and they said to him, in the question session, they said, Stephen, if I get enlightened, will I still be able to have sex? And he said, don't worry, you're a long way from getting enlightened. So yeah, we don't want to worry about reflecting on your life and all the desires that you have. The key is to be able to stop even for a second and see and know the unconditioned element of the mind, where the mind isn't lusting after anything, where it becomes bright and clear and self-evident, and there's no object in the mind. Then, like, the insight comes very clearly. Oh, that's what this is. That's what this teaching is all about. It's what is called the insight into knowing what is the path and what is not the path. Yeah. Anyone else have any desire stories or questions or thoughts about Samson and Delilah?
Yeah, but Pandit.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually,
yeah.
I was recently reading one of Ajahn Sumido's writings, and he talked about desire in terms of the need for us to understand and come to terms with both pleasant and unpleasant. Once we understand, he said that it's easier to actually let go of pleasant desires then the unpleasant, because the aversion will always be there. For example, he gave the example of bodily functions. We go around trying to be polite and not talk about normal bodily functions like urinating or going to the toilet or letting go of gas. And I think that is very fundamental in terms of understanding that part of the Four Noble Truths, first Noble Truth, the one thing and not one thing. So the desire not to one is very important, especially in terms of the unpleasantness that goes around us. What do you think, Bhante?
Yeah, pleasant and unpleasant, or the pushing and the pulling in the mind. One of the words for desire that the Buddha uses, which is my favorite, is the word nandi. And nandi means to hold in your hand. And nandi is slightly used in a different context, slightly to desire or tanha, craving after. Because nandi includes the things that you like and that you dislike. So I've noticed that in my mind, I tend to focus on the things that I dislike. And that also is a form of desire. I'm holding it in my mind. When I'm in the Bangkok traffic and I've invented this new traffic system called the Naga train, which dips underneath the road, and I made a whole thing. I even drew diagrams solving the Bangkok traffic problem. But the point is that it's something that I dislike, but I hold it in the mind. So it is important to note that desire is not just for things that you like, but is holding objects in the mind that you dislike is just the same as the objects that you like. The teaching on letting go of it, when you dislike something, it is easier to let go of than when you like something, according to the teaching. But it all depends on your practice. What I found is when I've learned that I can go without things, this was tremendously empowering to me, that when there's something that I want, or I'm talking to somebody and I want them to believe like I believe, or like the politician that I like, or something like that. And then I feel this desire in my mind and this non-acceptance of the other person. Having practiced in letting go of these feelings, then I can just sit and accept the other person for what they are and allow them to have their particular views and opinions. But it's a muscle that you practice. And if you're not willing to endure, then you're always going to be chained by what you want.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Bhante.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking in terms of unpleasant desire. For example, if you mention a favorite politician, then you see the emotions all suddenly start to come up, and that is very hard to let go because we become very judgmental.
Yeah, you become blind. Your eyes are put out.
Sorry?
You become blind, like Samson. It blinds you, it chains you, and then you put to work trying to get the thing that you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, anyway, okay. Sorry, I've taken a lot of your time. Over to the others.
There's a whole teaching on liking and disliking. I don't like the terms pleasant and unpleasant, which is what Buddhists usually use. Yeah. Because there is some discussion and argument about this, but if there is an object, then we say that object is a pleasant sensation or an unpleasant sensation. So, for example, if you give Marmite to any American, they're going to say that's an unpleasant sensation. But if you give it to an Englishman, they will say it's a pleasant sensation. But that suggests that things in the world actually have an innate quality of being pleasant or unpleasant. But actually the mind can change. You can, something that's unpleasant now, you can suddenly find the pleasant in it. Somebody said to the Buddha at one point, what is the supernatural power that you recommend people develop? And he said, the greatest supernatural power you can develop is to be able to find pleasant, the unpleasant, and to find unpleasant, the pleasant. So something that you like, you can turn your mind into not liking it. And something that you dislike, you can turn your mind into liking it. He said this was the greatest supernormal power that you can develop, which was an interesting reply. So I use liking and disliking because liking is more active than pleasant and unpleasant, but different people have different opinions. But it's, yeah, part of the same mechanism. The pushing and pulling in the mind, the point is you have to push those pillars aside, collapse the temple, all those little jeering voices on the top of the temple. And when they cease, when everything ceases, what you find is that you're still there, but enlightenment starts to show itself.
Bante, in Soka's quest, Soka, the king of the gods, visited the Buddha and asked one question. Why is it, Lord, we all want to live happily, still we cannot? They didn't have the Ukrainian war back then, but there were plenty of other problems and wars. And the Buddha was explaining why we are like that. But in the middle of the sutta, Soka's quest, Buddha said, there are good desires. Is it still a desire? Good desires like...
yes, good desires are still desires, and they have to be let go of.
Like if I have the desire to become enlightened in one of my lifetimes, or just to become a better human being with their bad thoughts, still a desire.
Right. I call this feeding the cat desire. I desire to feed the cat, and is that a bad thing? Do I let go of the desire and then the cat starves? So there are good desires and bad desires, but to the yogi who is practicing or is on this journey to find the ultimate, then no, you have to be able to step outside of this system of the desiring mind.
I see. I understand.
Now, if you're enlightened and you're always in that perfectly enlightened state of mind, are there any desires arising? So this question came up. It's kind of amusing. I always found the question of whether the Buddha can have a desire or not. And this was a genuine question that came up. I see the Buddha having lots of desires. You know, he got up out of his seat and he walked to this town, and then he chatted to this person, and then he went an arms round and he did this, and then somebody came to him and he wanted to get them enlightened. I mean, I don't see a problem with that, but the question came up, does the Buddha have desires or not? And it came up in the form of whether the Buddha can commit kamma, or an action, because without a desire, you won't commit an action, a kamma. So we see in the sutras, the Buddha clearly made actions. So what they did in the Pali was they used a different word for it. They said, the Buddha's actions are kiriya, which means action, as opposed to karma, which also means action. So just by having a different word for it, they solved the problem. And I found this quite amusing. So the question whether the enlightened mind has desire or not, well, I'll tell you when I get enlightened, but it is an interesting question, philosophically.
Then we'll have to wait till next year. being this the
Yeah, I'll
last
tell
of
you
your
next
talks?
year. Next time Meredith puts me in. One of the other teachings that the Buddha gave very, very regularly was a threefold teaching of understanding or insight. And he said, you must understand the satisfaction of things, the misery of things, and the refuge from things. So can't quite remember the Pali terms right now. So it's a recognition that when you put your mind onto certain things, it produces happiness. And there is a satisfaction in doing that, in having something nice to eat, smell, taste, touch, somebody to be with. He said you have to recognize that that satisfaction is there. If you don't, you're deluded. He said you also have to recognize the misery of the mind when it becomes chained to something, even if it's something good. So understanding that misery is also the something that needs to be practiced and known. And then he said the third one is the saranat, or the refuge. Often in the translations, it's given as escape. So the escape from things. So yeah, we recognize that things are very alluring and have a satisfaction. We recognize that things have a certain misery that they cause in the mind. But we also recognize that there is a point where we escape from this entire mechanism. So that's what we are practicing as yogis.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
And
Pandit,
Helena.
yeah, I just wanted to share what I was thinking about. So thank you very much for this very good topic. When you're talking, I was thinking about why like one of my desires would be to have some money left for when I'm older, so I don't have to live on the street or something like that. So then I was thinking, is that a type of desire? And it is. And I think maybe, as you say, it's because I don't want to deal with the misery if I don't have that outcome. And then I thought maybe with chips, it's like you don't want to feel the bodily feeling of not having them, so you have them. And if you want to reach enlightenment, like Frank, you don't want to deal with the feeling of not reaching enlightenment. So it's kind of like driven by fear as well. Would you say that?
Right. The problem is you can construct stories out of things, and we have to do this as human beings. I also have had the same thought as you. I have a problem in Thailand. They took away my free healthcare about 10 years ago, so I have to pay for hospital treatment now. So long term, I have to think about this and say, well, I'm going to have to leave Thailand. With probably my only option, which is what I'm going to do. So you have to think about these things. You can't say, I'm going to be a Buddhist and not have desire and not pay my mortgage or not pay my pension scheme or not feed my cat. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But what you're doing there is constructing a story, and the story of my retirement and my money. Well, there's a part of your life you're going to have to pay attention to that. But to a yogi, you can see that feeling or that idea come up, and you can see the mind latch onto it and take hold of your mind. Then you can see the moment where you stop thinking about it, you let the mind off it, and then the story dissipates. That story of looking after your retirement is not there the whole time. It's a thought or an object that arises in the mind, grabs hold of you, and then your mind passes on to something else. You're watching your favorite TV program, or you're walking the dog, and then that story is gone. So we need to be careful about this process of creating stories around something, because what you've done there is you've created a story around my retirement fee, and then it feels like that story is real and it's always there. Because every time you reach into your bag and you fish around and you pull out your story, there it is, that same story again. Same for childhood, my childhood or my partner or my house that I want to build or whatever. These are stories that we construct. But to a yogi, you're watching what's coming up in your attention right now. This process, you put your attention onto something, all of this desire and stuff comes up and starts to lure you in. And it's knowing the freedom from that is our practice. Now, you can't do that the whole time. You definitely should plan for your retirement and look after your health and feed your cats. I mean, you should definitely do these things.
Yeah. Thank you. That makes sense.
Oh, Pandit, yeah, can I?
Sorry, KK, on the screen it says your name is Molly.
Yeah, yeah. I have hijacked her iPad. Yeah,
there's a line on top of KK, which is actually Molly was behind it.
Yeah,
say hi to her for me.
Yeah, I'm coming back to just now what we talked about enlightenment and the fact that we continuing desire. Isn't the reality that in this life we will continue through the cycle of desires and misery and happiness, except like in what dependent origination teaches us, that they are momentary. There are moments when we get rid of some of the conditions so that we have cessation in those moments, after which we come back. We are reborn into the next moment when we have the cycles again. That will be, I mean, in my mind, that's the reality of this life. As long as I live this life, I will continue to go through the cycles. So there is not going to be a long-term enlightenment, because whatever happens, when we get out of the condition, is only the momentary.
Yeah. The entirety of Buddhism depends on this momentary view of seeing things moment to moment. You can't get rid of desire in your whole life. It doesn't have any philosophical grounding or logical process to it. But moment to moment, these things make perfect sense. And to a yogi, and seeing the end of, that's when the desire ceases. That's when my mind stops latching onto any object at all. And then freedom starts to show itself. Like, that's what I'm developing in this lifetime. Yeah. So everything depends on that moment.
That's where the insight comes in our reflections. Yeah. Thank you, Pandit.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, do you think the Dalai Lama is enlightened?
Probably not. It's one of those things that certainly in my tradition, we very much emphasize temporary enlightenment. So it's not always clear in many Buddhist traditions. In my own temple system, this is very clear that one attains to Nibbana as a temporary experience. And then the path becomes clearer and obvious, and you know what to do. And this in the suttas is called Ceto Vimutti Jnana Dasana. So Ceto is the heart or the mind, and Vimutti is liberation. And Jnana comes from the same root as our word knowledge. And Dasana means to see, not with wisdom, but to see directly. So Jnana and Dasana means you see and you know the liberation of the mind. So the Buddha talked about this a lot. I mean, this was you're not yet an arahant, you're not a Buddha, you're not enlightened, but you have seen and known enlightenment directly. So this is something that can be experienced by us mere mortals. And as far as I understand it, you get to a certain point and there becomes very little more you can do. You just have to wait for your karma to expend itself. There are some suttas that talk about this, but they're rather sketchy. But it goes something like this, that some people reach liberation, but they're unable to be fully liberated in this lifetime, but they become liberated upon death. Others, after death, they go to another realm. There they become liberated. And there's a couple of these things. And the analogy was given as like a blacksmith beating the hot iron, and a spark would fly off the iron. And sometimes the spark is glowing as it rises up in the air, and then it gets extinguished. Sometimes the spark is glowing as it goes up in the air and as it comes down, and then it gets extinguished. And other sparks go up, they come down, and they rest on the ground still glowing before they're extinguished. So this was a somewhat sketchy and unusual teaching in the scriptures, but it was talking about when you reach the full liberation of the heart, there is a certain amount of karma that has to unwind itself before you become an arahant. So the implication was, don't worry about becoming enlightened, just so long as you've got this this insight, then your karma will just play itself out.
Yeah.
So hopefully the Dalai Lama, that's what the Dalai Lama is doing, but who knows?
Thank you, Betty.
Bhante, I've got a quotation stuck to my screen here that I've always liked. It's from Suzuki Roshi. And he says, strictly speaking, there are no enlightened beings. There's only enlightened activity.
Yeah, well, that was the thing that, is there somebody there or not after you're enlightened? I like Ramana Maharshi, his path was, he said, you should follow the I am, and follow the I am all the way until you reach the source. When you reach the source, you realize there's nobody there, and then you know who you are. Something like that. So, yeah. But I want to make one thing very clear that is important. In meditation, there are experiences where it feels like your self or your ego dissipates, but this isn't real. This is just part of your mind shutting down. The correct and the proper experience is you feel and know yourself stronger, brighter, clearer. There is a sense of I am, but there is not a sense of I am something. So don't, I want to just remind people that this experience where the mind starts shutting down and zoning out, and you get this kind of bzzz, and then you're not quite sure, was I awake or was I not awake? Was I meditating? Was I not meditating? That's the false samadhi. That's the wrong samadhi. The correct one is very, very bright, very clear, very like present. There is no mistaking that here I am, but I'm just not, young or old, or I'm not this person or that person. I'm not a writer or a blacksmith or a poet. This is clear, the unconditioned presence. Yeah.
So I really love this dialogue discussion session. It's whatever you learn, it sinks deeper in our mind. And thank you, Bhante, for giving enough time for us to involve in these discussions. It's always great to hear your teaching. Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in.